Okay, folks, apparently we're ready to go. And we're going to be fairly informal this afternoon, which will be hopefully nice for everybody in the audience to just take an informal approach. We'll be here from 1:30 to 3 o'clock, myself and Elaine Shorty. And by way of introduction, my name is Beth Moss. I'm with the Huna Indian Association. And my co-presenter, Lisa Andersson, was not able to make it today. But I do want to give her some special kudos. She did quite a bit with the data analysis for this presentation. I also want to thank the folks that helped us do the surveys and interviews that I'll be presenting information about. Those folks are Janis Byers, Angela Jack, and Alice Haldane, and you probably know many of those folks from Huna. Again, they're not able to be with us here today, but their assistance was invaluable. And of course, most importantly, I want to thank all of the people who agreed to work with us on this project, too numerous to mention. We interviewed 251 tribal members from Huna Indian Association, and information from those interviews are what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So my thanks to all of those folks who took the time to share their knowledge and their background with us. So what I want to talk with you about today are ways that the community of Huna has been maintaining our traditions in the face of a changing world. And I don't think there's anything new about the idea of a changing world to those of you in the audience. All of us are faced with a number of factors that are affecting our traditional lifeways. The community of Huna no differently than Angoon and Yakutat and Sitka and even Juneau, those of you who are living in a metropolitan world. What I'm going to be visiting with you about today is a survey that we conducted using National Park Service funds, Heritage Preservation Funds. Some of you might be familiar with that granting process. They provided us with funding to survey our tribal members and get a better understanding of the traditional skills that are available in the community, and then look at what's happening with those skills across time, across age groups, etc. I think everybody knows where Huna is. We are just below Glacier Bay National Park, which of course is the traditional homeland for the Huna Tlingit people. We're about 30 miles by air from Juneau, or by ferry. And the objective of our project was to try to get a handle on, again, the traditional skills that are extant in our community across a variety of age groups. We wanted to be able to document the traditional knowledge that is available in the community. This is going to be a bit difficult. I'm going to try to slide this over. Yeah, we were supposed to have a clicker, but it hasn't arrived, so bear with us while we wait for the clicker. Importantly, we wanted to gather this information so that organizations like Huna Indian Association, Huna Heritage Foundation, Huna Totem, the National Park Service, and the Forest Service, who develop programs to maintain or foster traditional lifeways, would understand what traditional lifeways were important in the community, which were at risk of being lost, and which perhaps were stable or actually safe. So we hoped that the data that we collected would be background for those organizations. And very importantly, what we wanted to do was to identify the tradition bearers in the community. Oftentimes we go to the same elders over and over again for particular bits of knowledge. And we know that there are lots of other people out in the community who have traditional knowledge, but perhaps are not the folks that are in the forefront in the community. So we wanted to reach out to the community as a whole and learn where some of those secret pockets of knowledge might be. Sometimes those secret pockets lie with people that we don't seek out, and so we wanted to identify any and all tradition bearers in the community. So our goal essentially was to identify the traditional skills and knowledge in the community, obviously so that we could protect that information for future generations and look for ways to pass traditional knowledge and traditional skills down through intergenerational learning. We surveyed any tribal member 14 years or older. We made the break at 14 simply for logistical reasons. We surveyed through a number of mechanisms. First and foremost, we just went door to door, just like the U.S. Census Bureau folks do. We knocked on doors and asked people if they would be willing to participate. We also went to a variety of places of employment. So, for example, Huna Indian Association, we surveyed all of the employees at Huna Indian Association. We also went to Icy Strait Point on one of their free days, their non-ship days, and set up a table and interviewed employees that worked there. It was just an easy way to capture folks. We went to a variety of special events like basketball games and so on, and again set up tables and asked people to fill out interview forms for us there. And lastly, we made some phone calls, and the phone calls were primarily for folks who lived in Juneau. We did survey a number of tribal members who were not residents of Huna, so the phone calls allowed us to capture information from tribal members who don't live right in the community. Of course, we had permission slips signed for anybody under 18. That's a requirement for any surveys that are conducted with federal funds. We rewarded participants with a whopping $5 gift certificate for a local snack shop. And believe it or not, that was actually a wonderful incentive, particularly for the young people. I want to add that our survey was 7 pages long, and the average length of a survey period was about 45 minutes. So that's actually quite a bit of time to ask somebody to set aside. So we wanted to provide at least a nominal thank you to people who participated. So the $5 gift certificate was our way of thanking people. And then, of course, lastly, for elders, we provided them with a $100 honoraria. And the elders, we actually tape recorded. We did not record every interview, but the elders were tape recorded. And then those digital tapes are now stored on our computer server, and then we've also made backup copies as well. This is the front page of the survey form that we used. Again, it was a 7-page survey form, so very extensive survey. Rather than handing the survey to participants, we actually had interviewers who walked people through. And the reason we chose that approach was because we knew the survey was going to be fairly detailed, and we wanted to make sure that we captured the information as accurately as possible. So we had interviewees who sat with the participants and walked them through the survey. We obviously captured background information from folks, names, ages, their addresses, their clan representation, and then just general background about their genealogy if they knew it. The focus of the survey, however, was on the kinds of activities, traditional activities that people participated in. So here's a subsection of our survey form. For example, we asked people to tell us whether they had participated in any of the following activities, and then we would run through the activities. So, for example, here, hunting, we're looking at hunting. We asked people, did you go hunting for deer in the last year, within the last calendar year? And people were asked to categorize how many times they had hunted. Either no, they had not hunted in the previous year, they had hunted once, they had hunted between 2 and 5 times, or they had hunted 6 or more times for each species. And then we went through fishing and trapping and so on. If people indicated that they had not hunted in that year, in the previous year, we asked them, when was the last time that you participated in that activity, if ever? Folks were often able actually to pinpoint the year. If they weren't able to pinpoint the exact year, we asked them for a range of years. In many cases, particularly for the elders, they would say, oh, about 20 years ago. If that was the most accurate information we could capture, we captured that. And then again, we asked them if when you used to participate, about how frequently would you participate in a given year? Once, 2 to 5 times, or 6 or more times. And then we wanted to try to get a handle on the level of knowledge that a particular participant might have in an activity. And this was really a tough one. It's really difficult to ask people, how much do you know about hunting? I think any of us would have a hard time answering that question. And so we came up with some what we call proxies, some categories that we thought would help us to have at least a basic understanding of people's level of knowledge. So we asked people whether their knowledge of a particular activity was something that they gained only as a child. So for example, did you used to go hunting with your grandfather as a child, but you no longer participate? That was one category. A second category was non-participating knowledge. So, for example, there are many women in the community who don't hunt themselves, but they go hunting with their husbands or their fathers or their brothers frequently. So while they're not participants, they certainly have knowledge about hunting practices. They know where their husbands go. They know quite a bit about where the animals hang out and so on. So we also wanted to capture that kind of knowledge. Then we asked people whether if they did participate, do you always participate with someone else, or are you comfortable going on your own? And again, we assumed that if somebody was comfortable participating in an activity on their own, that indicated a slightly higher level of knowledge than somebody who was only comfortable participating in an activity if there was a group of people going. It turned out that those two categories are not nearly as useful as we imagined, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. But it was our best guess at the time as to how we could get a handle on level of knowledge. And then last, we asked people if they were comfortable teaching a particular activity. And obviously, if you're comfortable teaching, we assume that means that you have a very high level of knowledge in a particular activity. So the results of our study. As I mentioned, we surveyed 251 tribal members. That is about 50% of the active enrolled tribal members in the Huna Indian Association. We slightly overrepresented females. 57% of our respondents were female, 43% were male. And in age categories, we compared the range of ages that we surveyed to U.S. Census Bureau data from the year 2000, which is the most recent information that's available. And we found that we actually underrepresented youth in our survey and overrepresented elders in our survey. So on the left-hand side, you can see the number of young people who were 18 or younger. The next category is 19 to 25-year-olds, 26 to 44-year-olds, 44 to 64-year-olds, and the far right-hand side is a 65 and older, or the elder category. We also asked people for information about their employment, full-time, seasonal, part-time, because we believed that employment probably affects an individual's ability to participate in an activity. And in fact, we heard this repeatedly. Oh, I used to go hunting every year, but now I have a job. So employment statistics were very important for us. And then we also asked people for information about their access to vehicles, boats, and cars in particular. Again, because we believe that that access to vehicles affects an individual's ability to participate. Certainly in hunting and fishing activities, boats and vehicles are very important. We surveyed people from 15 different clans, and of course, our largest group of participants were in the 5 clans that are originally from Huna: the Chukanadi, Kagwantan, Wushkitan, Dakdaintan, and then the Luknahari, the Koho people. 97% of our respondents knew their clan. That means that 7 people didn't, and we know who they are. 78% of the individuals knew their clan house. So there are 25% of our respondents who didn't know what house they were from. 76% knew their clan crest, their primary clan crest. So again, there are 25% of the folks that we surveyed did not know their primary clan crest. 63% could name 2 clan crests, and 29% could name 3 or more clan crests. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is also a reflection on the number of crests that a particular clan has. So that's not only an indication of knowledge. We did look again at age information. So again, the categories here are younger than 26, younger than 25, 26 to 40, 41 to 64, and 65 or older. As you can see, the elders, of course, were most familiar with their clan crests, although a surprising number of young people were very familiar with their clan crests. We also asked people a little bit about their regalia, what kinds of regalia they might own. Again, we assumed that this was a reflection on not only their participation in cultural activities, but their pride in themselves as native Tlingit people. We found a variety of regalia ownership. Again, the most frequently owned items were vests, button blankets, headbands, and then moccasins. Very few people had aprons or leggings or wristlets or masks or shakyats. In terms of the age categories of folks that owned regalia, it was very evenly spread, and we were excited to see that lots and lots of young people, in fact 80% of our folks below the age of 26 had some form of regalia. We then asked people to talk a little bit about Tlingit names, and this first piece of data is a little shocking, but I think it's an artifact of the method that we used to gather this information. We asked people to write their Tlingit names down on the survey form, and only 14% wrote their Tlingit names down. I don't think that that's actually a reflection of the number of people who know their Tlingit names. I think it's just that in the 7 pages of forms that folks filled out, they neglected to fill out their Tlingit name. So we're very hopeful that more than 14% know their Tlingit names, and we're fairly certain that data is not accurate. 31% of our respondents knew their mother's Tlingit name, and again you can see the age categories of people who knew their mother's Tlingit name at the bottom. Obviously the elders, the folks in the 65 or older category on the far right, were much more familiar with their mother's Tlingit names than were the folks in the younger generations. We did ask them to write these names, yes. So these folks actually documented in writing their mother's Tlingit name. So again, Linda, I'm sure you're concerned about why only 14% wrote their names down. The names were written on 2 separate sections of the forms, and so we think that the section of the form where people were supposed to have written their own name folks paid less attention to that. It was at the beginning of the form, and I think folks were racing to get to the exciting part of the interview. We really want to get better information on this, but for now, we're really hopeful that 14% is inaccurate. 23% of the respondents knew their father's Tlingit name, and again, no surprise, it's the elders who are most familiar with their paternal Tlingit name. We asked some information about familiarity with stories and songs, and this was really shocking. We asked people if they were familiar with the Raven creation story, and only 58% of folks could tell us the basics of the Raven creation story. And only 8% of those said that they had a fairly high level of knowledge of the Raven creation story. We were really surprised at that. Then look at the bottom graph, and you can see that who are those folks who know the Raven creation story? It's the kids. It's the folks in the younger than 26 age category. And forgive me for referring to them as kids. Young people. That category also includes young adults. So obviously we're doing lots right in our school system because it's the younger people who know these stories. 41% knew their own clan stories, but a shocking few of them, 4%, indicated that their knowledge of their own clan stories was high. We did some extrapolating, and what that means is the population of Huna, about 20 people feel that they know their clan stories well. That's frightening. That's a frighteningly few number of people. Again, who knows these clan stories? It's primarily the elders, of course, but look, there's actually quite a number of young people who feel comfortable with their knowledge of their clan stories. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about why that is, but I attribute that to the wonderful job that folks like Duffy Wright are doing in the school systems. 48% of our respondents knew clan songs. Again, only 4% indicated that they had a high level of knowledge of their clan songs. And again, those tend to be the elders, but look, more than 70% of young people are familiar with their clan songs. Anybody want to guess why that is? Why do our young people know their clan songs? Guesses? At school is one guess. I think that's a possibility, again, thanks to Duffy, but I think there's also something really powerful happening in our community that's probably happening in other communities, and that is that 47% of our respondents are participating in a dance group. And who are those folks that are participating in a dance group? It's largely the elders and the young folks again. So 80% of our young people are active in a dance group. That is thanks to folks like Carol Williams who lead Gaudakon, a young youth dance group that participates throughout the year, and then especially, of course, at Celebration. So I think that a lot of these young folks are learning their clan songs, not just at school, but through their participation in dance groups. And we see that as a powerful venue for future educational activities. Our language statistics were both concerning, but also invigorating in some ways. 38% of our respondents indicated that they spoke Tlingit. 12% indicated that they spoke it well or moderately well. Again, no surprise, it's our elders who are speaking the language, although 50% of our young people indicate that they speak Tlingit. And that's not, they weren't categorizing themselves as speaking it well or speaking it moderately well. It's just they speak Tlingit, period. 54% indicated that they understood Tlingit, 20% understood it well or moderately well. And again, it's our elders who are the folks that understand the language, of course, with, again, 50% of our young people having an understanding of the language. Ironically, only 40% thought they could introduce themselves in Tlingit, and I'm not sure how that happened, that 54% understand it, but only 40% can introduce themselves. 14% felt that they could introduce themselves well. Again, it's a surprising number of young people, 40% 43% about could introduce themselves in Tlingit. And again, that's thanks to folks like Duffy Wright, and particularly some of the activities that the school participates in that encourage young people to stand up in front of an audience and introduce themselves. Now I'm going to move on to some of the food gathering activities in the community and present data on those activities. We asked people whether they had hunted in the past year. 37% indicated that they had hunted. That's actually a decline, almost half. 64% indicated that they used to hunt, and now only 37% hunt. So a pretty dramatic decline. The category hunting included a range of hunting for a range of species, and also included activities like hunting for seagull eggs. Again, here's the range of species that were hunted for. The dark bar is actually the number of people who participated in that activity. The lighter bar are the number of people who did not participate. So folks were most likely to hunt for deer or seal in the community. There were very few people who were hunting for porcupine, mountain goat, ptarmigan, grouse, any of those other species. Men were much more likely than women to have hunted, although we do have a hearty few women in the community, like Veronica Dalton, who's hunting for seal here. And the folks that were most likely to hunt were in this middle age category. Younger folks, for whatever reason, are not hunting. And that's information that we knew just from listening to the kids in high school. Very, very few of them are going out hunting. And again, we extrapolated from the data that we had, and if our data is accurate, it indicates that only 26% of the young folks in our community are actively hunting. That's a surprisingly few number of folks. Of course, people who hunted were much more likely to have a boat or a car than non-hunters. So one of our solutions is to give every tribal member a car and a boat. We just have to get the grant to do that. 45% of our respondents had fished in the last year. That's compared to 78% who indicated they had fished in previous years. The species that were most commonly fished for were halibut, the full range, the 5 species of salmon, and then dolly varden. And I should mention that we were very careful that we asked people to only include non-commercial fishing. So this is just subsistence fishing, personal use fishing, not commercial fishing activities. Men were more likely than women to have fished. And again, we see that surprisingly few number of folks in that young category who are fishing, except for my beautiful daughter, who is standing holding her first dolly varden. I had to slip a picture of her in there. Again, not surprising, folks who indicated they had fished were much more likely to have a boat than non-fishermen. We asked people to tell us about their shellfish harvesting activities. 47% had harvested shellfish in the last year compared to 82% in the past. The species that were most commonly harvested were Dungeness crab, a variety of clam species including cockles, and gumboots. Men were slightly more likely than women to have harvested. And look at this, there are lots more young people participating in shellfish harvest. I think going out to dig cockles or pick gumboots is a relatively easy activity, and so you see a lot of the younger people engaged in those kinds of activities. It doesn't require a lot of gear or know-how. Berry picking was another popular activity, but one that also has declined fairly dramatically. 46% had harvested berries in the past year compared to 85% in previous years. The most commonly harvested species were blueberries, salmon berries, and huckleberries, although strawberries were close behind. Men were as likely as women to pick berries. Here's George Dalton and Linda Bellardi harvesting our salmon berries. And obviously a really fun activity for young people to participate in, actually a range of people. It was interesting that for this category, the elder category picked up. There were very few elders who were participating in hunting and fishing, presumably because those activities are fairly rigorous and require extended periods out, whereas berry picking is something that folks can fairly easily do in a short amount of time. And again, obviously, very fun activity for young kids, and it requires very little skill. 43% of our respondents indicated that they had harvested wild plants compared to 78% in the past. One of the things that we really wanted to get a handle on was traditional gardening as well, and we included that in this wild plant category. We had very few people who were participating in gardening activities in the community, and that's something that we'd like to reinstill. Wild celery, Devil's Club wild celery, Hudson Bay tea, and seaweed were the most commonly harvested wild plants. Men were only slightly more likely than women to harvest. And again, the age range of folks participating was a little bit more even than some of the activities. Again, picking beach asparagus and so on is a relatively easy activity for young people to participate in. We asked about food preparation activities ranging from jarring to preparing seal grease. 55% had processed food in the past year compared to 80%, and the most common forms of food processing included smoking and drying fish and then putting up seal oil. Jarring in general. Men were as likely as women to process food. And again, you see our age statistics dropping. Our younger people are not participating as heavily in these food preparation activities. They require a little bit more skill, probably, than some of the other activities. Again, extrapolating from our data, it looks like only 38 individuals younger than 26 are doing any kind of food preparation, so we're very concerned that those skills might be lost in the community. And last, we asked people to give us some general information about their participation in traditional arts and crafts. 35% were practicing some form of traditional craft compared to 65% in the past. The activities that were most common were carving, design work, beading, and regalia making. Women were much more likely than men to be practicing some sort of traditional art or craft. And look at that, our young people are really active, which is exciting. 70% of our youth below the age of 26 are participating in some form of traditional art or craft. So what does this all mean? We obviously were a little discouraged at some of the activities, some of the obviously the diminishment in all of the activities, and very concerned about the fact that some of these activities are not being practiced by folks in that younger than 26 age category. So we wanted to look first at what is working in the community. What do we know has been successful? And obviously there are lots and lots of uncles taking nephews out hunting still, and aunties teaching their nieces how to jar food, or in this case, Owena teaching Kelly how to clean gumboots. So we know that that's happening in the community, and we want to pay tribute to those folks in the community who are passing down their knowledge just on their own. But we need to look to other programs beyond just families passing that information down. And one of the most successful programs that I've noticed in the community has been Sealaska's Master Artist Program. We weren't sure how that was going to work in the beginning, but we've seen it be wildly successful. Sealaska came into the community. They trained a number of participants in traditional design and in basketry, and we're watching the fruits of that Master Artist Program spill down now through our younger age groups, and I'll show you as we walk through what's happening in the community, how that is working. But here are the folks that participated in the design classes and then the basketry classes. Sealaska also sponsored language immersion programs in the community, and we think that those are incredibly beneficial. Again, Duffy Wright was one of the folks that participated in that immersion program, and the school is now benefiting from having Duffy as a language instructor. So Sealaska trained more individuals, but in this case trained one individual who is now passing that knowledge down very actively in the community. And here are some photographs from Duffy's classroom. You can see in the upper left-hand corner that the kids are learning about their clan, so that's wonderful. We're sure that those 7 folks who didn't know their clan were not from Duffy's class. And the kids are also, of course, learning Tlingit language in class. But as importantly, Duffy is teaching them to look at language in a holistic way. So the kids are not just speaking the language without any attachment to traditional life ways. They're talking about gumboots. They're talking about herring eggs. This young boy in the lower right-hand corner doesn't look very happy about eating herring eggs, but at least he's eating them. He's getting a chance to eat them in the classroom. And here's a classic example of that Sealaska program spilling over. So here is Misty Jack, who went through the Master Artist Program, and Duffy brought her into the classroom, and Misty is now showing the kids in Duffy's classroom basketry techniques. And then Jack Annis up in the right-hand corner, who's learning beading. Another wonderful example of cross-gender learning, so that not just the young girls are learning beading, but the young men as well. Duffy also brought elders into the classroom to share clan stories and songs, and then is doing intergenerational learning. I guess the middle school kids come in and work with the Head Start kids and teach them bits and pieces of language, so that the middle school kids have a sense of seeing the knowledge that they gained passed down immediately. I think, again, 2 of the most wonderful programs that the school sponsors and or that are somewhat affiliated with the school, the annual Kuich, where all of the school children participate in a Kuich every year in the spring. Ours is coming up the end of April this year. And then in the lower right-hand corner, Carol Williams and her Gaudikon dance group, which has turned out to be just an incredible venue for young people to gain pride in themselves and to learn clan songs, and also a little bit about clan protocol. Another wildly successful program that is co-sponsored by the National Park Service and Huna Heritage Foundation is the annual, or biannual, I should say, trip to Glacier Bay. The Park Service and Huna Heritage work together to take both the high school kids and the younger kids once a year up into the park on a chartered vessel. The students get an opportunity to hear their elders telling traditional stories and talking about traditional lifeways in place in this very sacred place of Glacier Bay. So the kids don't just hear these stories disembodied from the location that they were meant to be shared in. And then some longer trips also take place. In the upper left-hand corner is Frank White, the Kaawu clan leader, and he is at Kaawu, which is Kaawu homeland, on home shore, and he is sharing Kaawu stories with the high school students that the National Park Service transported to Kaknuu. In the lower right-hand photograph is a group of students who are spending a week kayaking in Glacier Bay, spending that time with some folks who are very knowledgeable, like Wayne Howell from the National Park Service, and learning a little bit more about their homeland. In recent years, the Parents as Teachers program in the community has been instrumental in teaching even younger kids. So in the last year and a half or so, folks like Harlena Sanders and Darlene C. are coming into this Parents as Teachers program, and they're teaching 1- and 2-year-olds how to dance and sing. That's in part how my daughter has learned to sing a number of songs. And it's amazing how young these kids can pick up language, obviously, as well as songs. And then PAT is doing some really fun, exciting things with young kids. So in the upper left-hand corner, the kids are getting to actually fish for Dungeness crab. The instructors went down to at low tide, and they harvested clams and cockles and crabs and so on. And the kids are actually getting to scoop in and touch these things themselves and experience them one-on-one. And then the kids are learning about drying fish and so on. So you can see some paper cutouts of salmon that are being hung to dry in the Parents as Teacher classroom. Another example of the Sealaska program being passed down, Darlene C., who went through the Basketry Master Artist program, is teaching the mothers who participate in Parents as Teachers basketry skills. And then quickly, just a few last minute things that are happening. We're trying to incorporate some aspect of traditional culture into almost anything that happens in the community. So here is some traditional face painting that we tied in with a Just Say No program in the schools. We brought in some younger folks and high school age kids and asked them to do traditional face painting with the young kids. What that meant is that these kids, of course, had to learn what clan they were from if they didn't already know, and then they got to look up traditional techniques for face painting for their particular clan. And what we thought that helped, because the high school kids, of course, were viewed as mentors, and then the young kids, of course, went home to their families with their face paint and were able to share that with their families. At that same night, we also had the kids whip up some soap berries, because that's, of course, a berry that is not very commonly harvested in the community anymore. At the Halloween carnival, most of the activities were focused on ring toss and so on. The tribe sponsored a clan tree, so the kids could come up and fill out a leaf with their hopefully their Tlingit name if they knew it, if not their English name, and then they pinned it on the branch that represented their clan. And again, in that process, many of the kids learned their clan, those kids who didn't know, and many of the adults learned their clan as well. The Clan Workshop, which is an annually sponsored event that Huna Heritage sponsors, is a wonderful opportunity for the entire community to learn about clan protocol. They're learning here a little bit about atu. Last year, the focus was on clan songs. A couple of last-minute projects. The Tlingit place names map. I don't know if all of you have had a chance to see this yet, but this is a labor of love that was begun back in the 1900s, back in the 90s. Well, actually, it was begun long before then, because of course the place names have been extant for long before this map or any of us were here. The late 1990s, Alaska Department of Fish and Game began this project. They collaborated with the National Park Service, and then ultimately Huna Indian Association came in and helped to finish up this project. It documents place names, about 200 place names of the Huna Tlingit people throughout their traditional territory with the translations. And that poster is now being translated into what Wayne Howell calls a talking map. This is a brainchild of Wayne with the National Park Service. He wanted to take this this map, this two-dimensional map, and convert it into something that was a more living, breathing experience, particularly for young people. So this talking map now displays the same information about a particular place, but you can press a button and hear an elder pronouncing the place name. And now, as of this year, you'll be able to press a button and hear an elder telling a story about a particular place name. Other activities that take place in the community, the fishing derby, of course, is one way that the Forest Service is hoping to encourage more participation in fishing. And then the Huna Indian Association has a number of grants, including a grant that is looking at harbor seal populations, working with local hunters to help facilitate their hunt, and then taking these seals that the hunters bring in, bringing them into the classroom and teaching young people about how to butcher a seal. So here's Owen James butchering a seal. This was just an amazing activity. The kids at first said, "Oh my gosh, gross." And then within 5 minutes, they all wanted to touch it and participate. A very hopeful program that we've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years is developing a cultural heritage center in the community. So we've assembled a group of tribal leaders that include members from Huna Indian Association, Huna Totem, and Huna Heritage, and represent all of the 4 primary clans in the community. And we have been working on developing plans for a cultural center that we hope is much more than a museum. We recently contracted with a world-renowned architect and exhibit firm to develop some conceptual ideas for this facility. And when you start seeing drawings, that's when people get really excited. So, and last, there are lots of things for us to work on. We're first and foremost, we want to continue to analyze the data. We've just begun looking at this data. There's lots more to look at. But some of the standouts from the analysis that we've done so far include, we need to capture our stories and songs right now. When only 4% of our population can retell us a clan story or a clan song well, those stories and songs are in dire need of being documented. We know we need to go back to the basics. We need to go back to the basics with clan crest information, with participating in very basic activities. Obviously, we want to focus on those activities that are underrepresented in our young population: hunting, fishing, wild plants, and food preparation. So we're looking for ways to encourage young people to partner with those people in the community who have that knowledge. But we don't want to forget those middle-aged folks, and you'll notice that for example, in language skills and in information, knowledge of clan crests and so on, it was often that 26 to 45-year age group who didn't have that knowledge. That's that overlooked generation, or that skipped over generation. So we want to make sure that we maintain programs for those folks as well. Programs like the Sealaska programs that focus on developing skill levels at that middle age group, for that middle age group. We're really interested in doing some genealogy and including information about Tlingit names in that genealogy, so that important information about your mother and your father and your grandparents' Tlingit names is not lost over time. We are really looking to dance groups in the community to serve as a venue for education. Obviously, they're very, very successful in terms of teaching kids the clan songs and somewhat stories. They might be a venue for kids to learn more about language, or maybe those dance groups could also be taken into Glacier Bay to learn traditional activity. Maybe it's a reward for those kids who come to dance practice all the time to get some sort of special activity, to be taken out berry picking or cockle digging or something. And lastly, we want to pursue this concept of vessel sharing. We do see the loss of vessels in the community as one of the reasons for the declines in activities like fishing, seal hunting, even some shellfish gathering. So we'd like to look at how we might provide vessels for folks who would like to participate but can't because they don't have the vehicle necessary. So those are a range of ways that we're looking to fix things. I'd love to hear ideas from folks here in the audience over the next 3 or 4 days. If you have ideas or thoughts about things that we might do in Huna, we'd love to learn from other communities. So please feel free to share your ideas. Thank you very much.
I'm here representing the Yukon First Nation Heritage Group. I'm the executive director. My traditional name is Nasha Claw, and I'm told that it means Mother of the Mountains. And sometimes these shoulders feel awfully weighed down because when you're Mother of the Mountains, you sometimes have to pack a lot. I'd like to thank everybody for coming here. I have traveled with some elders. I've traveled with my mother, Emma Shorty, who is our elder representative from the Tes and Tlingit Council. We also have a representative, Art Johns, who is participating in another workshop. He's here on behalf of Yukon First Nation Heritage Group, as well as Gertie Tom, who is from Carmax, and she's participating in another group as well. Art Johns is traditionally from the Carcross-Tagish First Nation. We do have 3 Tlingit nations that are known as the Inland Tlingit. That's the Carcross-Tagish First Nation, the Tes and Tlingit Council, and we do have the Taku River Tlingits, who are as well in Canada, and they reside in northern British Columbia. I've done my introduction already of who Yukon First, or who we are, and who I brought with me. I also brought Marilyn Jensen, who is sitting at this table here. If the people, my mom and Marilyn, if you both can stand up, just so people can know who you are. Marilyn Jensen is with the Carcross-Tagish First Nation. She has worked predominantly with Yukon First Nation Heritage Group in the past and has done some wonderful work with us. A little background on who Yukon First Nation Heritage Group is. First of all, we began in the year 2001. We started off in a workshop where all of the heritage departments within Yukon came together and met, and they all said that we needed something to guide us to work on issues, common issues. So they started up Yukon First Nation Heritage Group. Our membership is all 14 Yukon First Nations, as well as the Taku River Tlingits. YFNHG works collectively with all Yukon First Nations on heritage issues and initiatives. We meet 4 times a year. Sometimes we meet a little bit more. There's daily communication with head office in Whitehorse. Our vision statement is the Yukon First Nation Heritage Group will further foster Yukon First Nations in which every Yukon First Nation understands, appreciates, and lives their rich heritage. Current and future generations are inspired to protect and cherish their heritage. Heritage is respected and presented fully and accurately in every aspect of Yukon First Nation culture. Heritage strengthens, affirms, and helps sustain Yukon First Nation governments. The reason why I'm giving you this introductory of who Yukon First Nation Heritage Group is we are becoming a nonprofit society. We are opening up the doors. We're hoping that our cross-border brothers and sisters would want to become part of Yukon First Nation Heritage Group. And We really believe that we all basically are fighting for the same things, that's protecting, repatriation, all these wonderful things. We all want to do it at the same level. So that's why I'm giving this introductory of who Yukon First Nation Heritage Group is. Our mission statement in 1973 landmark document called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. Yukon First Nations people told the Canadian government that their people's desire to become self-governing again would be successful only when Canadians are proud of our Indian heritage and culture and respect our Indian identity. The Yukon First Nation Heritage Group is helping Yukon First Nations achieve this goal by sustaining and strengthening Yukon First Nation heritage as a global example of traditional, contemporary, and evolving heritage. Our statement of values is that we will act respectfully while conducting our business. We will act in a manner that fosters trust, integrity, and confidentiality. We will act in a manner that encourages open and supportive communication. We'll act in a manner that encourages positive relationships with other organizations, and we will act in a manner that reflects the values of our elders and our communities. And these goals and these values, we truly guide ourselves with that with Yukon First Nation Heritage Group. More goals and objectives is advocate for First Nation heritage interests on behalf of Yukon First Nations, policy development for heritage programs, endorsement of each chief and council for all initiatives. That means that everything that we do in our office in Whitehorse, we make sure that we have the endorsement of the chief and councils within our membership. Capacity development training, consistent group participation, promote awareness of heritage and heritage practices, establish an accredited cultural resource management program at Yukon College. That's something that we're recently working on. We are wanting to put a program, some type of training program through Yukon College where people, First Nations people in the Yukon can get some training. We liaison with other governments or other organizations, territorial, nationally, and internationally. We liaison with Canada, Yukon, and Yukon First Nations about Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is the guidelines that we abide ourselves by under the Umbrella Final Agreement, and that's with the self-governing First Nations in the Yukon. Some of our accomplishments is attending the Fire Forum. That is a conference that happened in Whitehorse. We have done a heritage training assessment Yukon-wide. We have the Yukon First Nations governance restructuring. We're in the middle of that right now, as well as continued liaison with Canada, Yukon government, and internationally, and of course our traditional knowledge policy framework. And that's what I'm going to get into right now. That's something that we have worked very, very hard on in the last little while. One of the reasons why we decided that Yukon needed a traditional knowledge policy framework is that we recognized that many researchers were coming into the Yukon, approaching our elders, approaching our youth, approaching middle-aged people, and they're asking us about traditional knowledge. They were trying to seek our traditional knowledge. There are many horror stories out there about people where they had a researcher come in, they recorded stories, and recorded it wrong. They put it into books. I'll give an example. We have one community in the Yukon where we have an elder. They paid him some money and had said, we would like to publish your stories. And he said he was very honored by all of that. And so he did that, and it was a university student. The university student took all these stories back to the university and they published them. Within the story, they put in swear words. They changed some of the stuff that he had said. This elder hung his head in shame, and he had said, my people are going to think this is how I talk. And this is things that happen within our communities, not only in the Yukon, but right across Canada, and I'm sure right in North America. So we came together and said, we need a policy, we need something to protect our elders, to protect our people who are who hold our knowledge. We need these people, we need something. So we created the policy framework. Again, we said the increasing need for policy to protect our traditional knowledge and to protect the rights of the traditional holders. And I say TK holders, that's not only our elders, it's pretty well everyone. Because everyone has some sort of knowledge, whether it be family-based, clan-based. Everyone has knowledge, and it needs to be protected. The two people that we hired to do the traditional knowledge policy framework in the Yukon were Brian McDonald, who is a Champagne-Asiac First Nation member. He is a lawyer, and he works on traditional knowledge and intellectual property rights, not only within Canada, but internationally as well. We had Julian McKee. She is a land use planner for Kwanlin Dun First Nation, and she had worked on TK processes in Northwest Territories. Yukon First Nation Heritage Group, when we were looking for funding, the first place we went to the Gordon Foundation, which is an organization in Canada that's very friendly to First Nations, and they funded us about $50,000 to begin the preliminaries, and we were quite happy with that. We got to a point where we had no funding, and we thought, what are we going to do? And they came up with the Northern Strategy, which is a Yukon government fund of a few $1,000,000. We had approached them, we wrote a proposal, and we were funded, which was just fabulous. We were funded about $350,000, and we began our work. What's in the policy? It's not a policy that tells First Nations how they should use TK. Can I get some water? As I was saying, it's not a policy that tells you how to use your traditional knowledge within your First Nation. It's a policy that gives you an opportunity to learn how to manage what you have and to manage what you are going to be researching or bringing in. The policy consists access to TK and sets out protocols that must be followed. What that means is that if somebody comes into the community and says that they would like to do research, they want to interview some of your elders, and we'll use traditional medicines as an example. One community, the Champagne-Asiac First Nation, what they've done is they said that they will allow people to come in to do research on traditional medicines, but what they will also do is that when the researcher comes in, they of course have to have all of the paperwork completed, but they will actually have one of their own members do the actual interviews. And the person, I'll use my mother as an example, they go and interview my mother. She will be part of the process where they edit the information. And they say, okay, this part will go to the researcher, and we're gonna keep this part. They've gone that far. That's how tight they are with their knowledge now, and that's what we wanted to see. That's what we envisioned when we created the traditional knowledge policy. The protocols are designed to protect the traditional knowledge and the holder of the traditional knowledge. Again, it's really important that we don't allow people to come into our communities and take things and have no regard for the person who had offered it. Management of the documented TK, and that's stuff that you guys already have, stories that you already possibly had recorded. In the Yukon, the process of the land claim, all of that information I regard as traditional knowledge, because they have gone out, they've done mapping on traditional sites, stories that our elders were able to tell, and the land claim process carried on for like 25, 30 years and is still going on. There's still First Nations in the Yukon that are not self-governing. There are rules and regulations in the TK policy template that should be followed to ensure protection of already documented TK within the nation. I'd already just said that. Documented TK should include, may include actually, sound and video recordings, written documents, pictures, and artifacts. Each First Nation is responsible to manage the holdings properly and set access guidelines. New TK research, there's, within the policy, the framework itself, there's prior informed consent for each of the First Nation participants or of the researchers. First Nations will encourage collaboration and participation in research. Many Yukon First Nations have written into their policies that is mandatory for collaboration and participation of the research, or the research may not be approved. Third-party requests. Each First Nation will evaluate requests for access to TK. First Nations will promote direct involvement of its citizens in decision-making involving TK. The Tlingit Council, what they have decided there is that they do have an Elders Council, and the Elders Council will be, they will work in hand with the Heritage Department. They will decide granting permission for researchers or whether or not they can come in, depending on what they would like to, what kind of information they'd like to get. So that's some of the stuff that's happening in the Yukon. For the Yukon, our implementation steps, we did hiring of community coordinators. Each First Nation hired their own individual community coordinators. We had first thought maybe it was a possibility that we would try and hire somebody from Whitehorse and do all of Yukon. But then we thought, well, community individuals know their communities far better than somebody from Whitehorse, so we set it up so that each of the nations could hire their own community coordinator. The First Nations then communicated the content of the policy and adjusted it to suit the needs of that community. Education for First Nation citizens came first, and then it went to outside parties, and that's community-based. One of the things that Yukon First Nation Heritage Group had done was, with the actual policy framework, we had government, the federal government and the Yukon territorial government coming to us and asking us to send them or give them our policy framework. And we did not do that until 99% of Yukon was implemented, and that was simply because government has a way of taking our policies and using it against us. So we decided at our roundtable that we were going to do that first. We were going to make sure that the policy was implemented within Yukon. In the Yukon, the complete project for all 15 First Nations took 19 months in total. The implementation stages were divided into 3-month segments. Each of the First Nations chose their time frame and hired their community coordinators for 3 months. What we've done so far, the completed steps for the policy, is the legal review. The implementation is about 99% of Yukon First Nations and the Taku River Tlingits. We continue communication in the policy of each of the nations. There's actually just one First Nation in the Yukon that has not done the implementation stage. They've not done that because they've got a backlog of stuff that they're trying to get done. They're a couple of years behind in files, and they said that they will do the implementation, but not right at the moment. But the way things are going and the way everyone is coming to the traditional territories now, asking for information, researching for oil and gas, all these things, I think that this one nation will get into implementation stage fairly soon. Yukon First Nation Heritage Group is presently working towards becoming a nonprofit society. We're planning on expanding not only in membership but capacity as well. Our future plans are to invite our cross-border First Nations to entertain the thought of giving Yukon or joining Yukon First Nation Heritage Group as members. As a Gunish cheese, and thank you for your time and patience. Our email address is yfnhg@northwesthell.net. If you have any questions at all about the policy framework or about Yukon First Nation Heritage Group, please feel free to approach me. I'll be here for the entire week. If anyone has any questions for myself or for Mary Beth, now would be the time to ask us. I do have the policy framework here with me. If you would like a copy of it, or if you think that you would like one of us at YFNHG to come to your community to present the full document. The full document is about 45 pages long, and for me to stand here and try and present that, I think everybody probably would have fell asleep. So when I'm talking about the policy framework, it's fairly lengthy, it's legal, it's in legal terms, but again, if you would like for one of us to come to your community, certainly let me know, and we'll try and work on something, because we truly want to try and get the policy out there, not only for Canada, but for across border. You have a question?
How much is your membership?
We don't have a cost for membership at this time. We have 4 meetings a year, and with our in the Yukon, we have 11 First Nations that are non-self-govern or that are self-governing, and 3 that are non. Yukon First Nation Heritage Group tries to get the funding to bring these people into Whitehorse for our quarterly meetings. And we pay for that, but the self-governing bodies, we get them to pay. And depending on whether or not we can access funding, we might be able to throw some money at people, members that choose to come from across the border. But there's no membership fee at this time. Go ahead.
Do you have any special annual events that go on?
Annual, like Yukon First Nation Heritage Group, or are you talking just Yukon?
Just Yukon.
Actually, Duane, do you want to come up here and talk a little bit about celebration next year? Duane Acoin is actually one of the Tlingit nations that are the inland, from the inland group. Go ahead.
I think she meant to say I'm actually from, not actually one of.
Sorry.
The inland nations.
You are. This is it.
I'm Teslin. So.
Sorry.
I didn't know you thought so highly of me. Thank you. Sheesh. July 22nd this year, we're planning an inland Tlingit celebration, the first ever. It's going to be in between years of celebration down here in Juneau. We plan to have it more traditionally based, more based around Hakusti'i, that our common culture that we share no matter what side of the border we're on. So we're here to invite all of our Alaska family up on July 22nd to the 28th to Teslin, Yukon, and this will be the first one, and it'll be every 2 years after that. So, sheesh.
There are a couple of other events that happen annually. I believe there's a storytelling every summer that happens every even year. There is a celebration that's called Moose Hide in Dawson. Every even year, right? Every even year.
Elaine and I know them well because we had a Thelma and Louise summer once where we went to every single gathering in the whole Yukon, and so it was a great summer.
Yeah, we didn't have children then. So are there any other questions, or if you feel that you would want a copy of the Traditional Knowledge Policy Framework in its full form, I can certainly share that. I'm more than happy to do that.
Take hers first. Oh. Have you gotten a chance to look at the policies that each of the nations have completed, and if so, how similar have they ended up looking?
What we did was first of all we created the Traditional Knowledge Policy Framework, and we gave that to each of the nations, and the nations took it and made it look what it should look like for their traditional territory. The one that looks the most different would be the Teslin Tlingit Council's policy. So they're all looking fairly similar, but they've inputted their uniqueness.
And were the communities in general supportive of the process?
Were they?
Yeah, were they?
Oh yes, all of the communities except for the one First Nation in the Yukon have not implemented, and it's not because they don't support the policy, it's because they're overloaded with work. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much. Truly enjoyed being here, and I'm really grateful to participate in the Clan Conference. And I'm just really, really happy to be here. And I'd like to thank Marilyn and all of the other First Nations people from the Yukon for being here as well. I would be Teslin, Carcross, and Atlin. Really grateful for that. I'm going to point out way in the back, there's Tip Evans. Wave, please, Tip. He is the Heritage Director for the Teslin Tlingit Council. He came and joined us as well, and we brought some elders. But thank you so much. And I'd like to just, at this time, offer condolences for all the families that have had recent losses. We've had loss in the Yukon as well, quite a few actually in the last couple of weeks. And you know, it's always hard to come to some kind of a gathering to participate and stand up here. But I just want to offer my condolences. Gunis chis.